He didn't even look nervous, just calm, smiling, like someone announcing a policy change at a staff luncheon. Due to restructuring, Logan said, folding his hands neatly on the table. We'll be adjusting your compensation, effective this Friday. Your salary will be reduced by $2,700 monthly. I sat there, still holding the travel folder from my Seattle trip. Closed deals, signed contracts. One client even sent a handwritten thank you card. I hadn't even taken off my coat. My throat tightened, but nothing came out. I scanned the faces across the table. HR rep to my left. Neutral. Logan in front of me, watching for my reaction. Not fear, not guilt, just measurement. Like he was trying to decide whether I'd explode or thank him. I hope you understand, he continued. You've been instrumental in building the system I now manage. You've built a strong foundation, one that can support a more sustainable model. I blinked. That phrasing, it was familiar. Because I had written it. Those exact words, strong foundation, sustainable model, were lifted straight from the operations manual I spent 2 months drafting for him during onboarding. I knew every line, every comma, and yet here he was, parroting them back at me like some CEO turned AI bot, repackaging my logic as justification to undercut me. I still didn't speak. What could I say? That I trained him too well? That my own words were now being used to push me aside? I nodded once, stood slowly, and walked out. As the door closed behind me, I caught the end of Logan's voice through the glass. She took it well, he said. Yes. Logan. I took it well. Too well. And just like that, the clock began ticking. Not for me, for him. The rain had started just as I stepped out of the office. Not a storm, just that cold, steady drizzle that soaks you without drama. I didn't bother with an umbrella. I walked to my car like a ghost in a trench coat, sat in the driver's seat, and stared through the windshield for a full 5 minutes before turning the key. I drove home in silence. No music, no news. Just the low hum of tires on wet pavement and the occasional slap of the wipers. My hands stayed locked at 10 and 2, but my mind drifted, back through almost 2 decades of early mornings, late nights, and weekends sacrificed to keep a company running that no longer saw me as worth a fraction of what I'd built. I was 42 when I first walked into Daxon Strategies, widowed, scared, still figuring out how to raise a 10-year-old daughter and keep the lights on after my late husband's insurance got swallowed by medical debt. They didn't hire me for potential back then. They hired me because I said yes to doing the job of 2 people for the salary of 1. And I did it. With no excuses, no sick days, no missed deadlines. I wrote the first database template from scratch on a second-hand laptop that crashed if you opened too many tabs. I debugged during Christmas. I trained interns who became managers. I built a reputation for reliability so strong that people stopped asking if I could do something. They just assumed I already had. Then came Logan. I'd seen his type before, young, polished, armed with buzzwords and investor sheen. But the board liked him. They said he brought energy and scale. And I, apparently, brought continuity. 18 months ago, they asked me to onboard him as the new chief client officer. You're the soul of the system, they said. Nobody can teach him like you can. They weren't wrong. I taught him everything, except integrity. I remember a moment during our first month working together. Logan had leaned back in his chair after one of our strategy briefings and said with a half smile, "You know, if you just chased promotions harder, you'd be running this department by now." I'd smiled back, but inside, something cracked. What he didn't know was that I'd been offered that very promotion, Vice President of Operations, 5 years ago. I turned it down. My daughter was entering high school at the time, and I didn't want to miss the last few years before she left home. I chose carpool lines over late-night flights. piano recitals over corporate dinners. Apparently, in Logan's world, that made me less ambitious. Now here I was, 19 years of service, condensed into 19 minutes of HR scripts and managerial jargon. As I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. My daughter was grown now, living across the country, married and thriving. She once called me her quiet hurricane, the one who never made noise but still moved everything around her. But tonight, I felt more like the aftermath. The air was still, the world had gone on, and I had disappeared from the company I helped raise like a second child. I stepped out of the car, the rain still falling, and told myself the same thing I used to whisper at the end of bad days. Just because they can't see your worth doesn't mean you've lost it. I used to tell myself I was doing the right thing. 18 months ago, when Logan joined as Chief Client Officer, the board assigned me as his transition partner. It was dressed up in compliments. No one knows the system like you. Sarah, he'll learn faster with your guidance. What they really meant was, teach him everything so he can replace you quietly. And I did. At 8:15 a.m. every Monday, we had our knowledge transfer meetings. Logan would bring a black leather notebook, smile like a politician, and nod at all the right times. He was good at that, nodding. Sometimes he'd lean forward, touch his chin, and say, "Wow, that's brilliant." I started calling it his TED Talk face. The truth? He rarely understood more than half of what I said. He learned fast. Yes, but not the work. He learned how to sound smart. He repeated my phrases in meetings with clients, mimicked my slide formats, even quoted my analogies word for word, once calling the CRM the invisible nervous system of client success, which was pulled straight from my onboarding script. Everyone thought he was insightful, visionary. I watched it happen week after week, the way my work became his language. And still, I told myself, it's fine, he's young, I'm teaching. That's good, right? But there were moments, like the afternoon he burst into my office, 3:20 p.m. I remember it exactly, waving a report full of red error flags. "Let's rewrite this part of the system," he said. "Streamline the code, make it cleaner. There's a bunch of legacy stuff in here we probably don't need." Legacy stuff? I leaned over and pointed at the highlighted section. "That legacy block," I said, "is the security heartbeat protocol. If you delete that, the automation threads desynchronize. You won't see it for days. But when it fails silently." He blinked. "Oh, yeah, good call. Glad I checked." He hadn't checked. He'd almost erased the one thing keeping client ops running in sync, and he would have never known why the contracts started falling apart 3 weeks later. That day, I realized something quietly devastating. I wasn't training a successor. I was babysitting a facade. And worse, I was starting to resent the part of me that let it happen. I used to think of myself as a builder, but lately, I felt more like a fading architect watching someone hang neon signs on a cathedral I'd carved by hand. I didn't retaliate with anger. I rewrote everything, with silence, the day after Logan nearly deleted the heartbeat protocol. I sat at my desk at 7:40 a.m., staring at the lines of code I'd lived in for 19 years. For the first time, I looked at it not as a creator, but as a guardian preparing for absence. If I was no longer seen as essential, then I needed to let the system prove it. And so, I began. Quietly, carefully. I layered in a series of fail-safes, what some might call redundancies. But I knew better. Each function, each workflow, each automation thread would now require periodic validation from my unique credentials, not to keep running. No, that would be too obvious. Instead, if left unauthenticated, they would begin to misalign over time, not crash, not error out. just drift. Timers would desync by seconds. Notifications would delay. Data logs would mislabel contact points. Nothing catastrophic, until it all piled up. Like gears that grind when just one tooth is off. I embedded the conditions slowly. Over weeks. 3:20 p.m. on Wednesdays was my quiet window. Logan was always out schmoozing clients or polishing his thought leadership posts on LinkedIn. I renamed the control sequences with generic labels like threadmonitor.alpha and QRefreshToken. Burying the real triggers behind standard admin layers no one else had ever needed to explore. My access remained live, masked as legacy override permissions, something even our IT audit bots skipped over. No one noticed, because that's the nature of systems that run well. People forget they're being held together by invisible hands. In my final file, a core logic module I hadn't touched since 2012, I scrolled to the bottom, added a single comment line above the signature hash. "You'll only miss me once I'm already gone." It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even pride. It was truth. I didn't plan to sabotage. I simply let the structure reflect reality, that it depended on someone they no longer valued, and when that someone was removed, the structure would reveal its cracks. I logged out at 6:20 p.m. that evening. No one knew what had changed. No one saw the storm beneath the surface. But it was there, waiting, patient, just like me. It started with a polite email on a Monday morning. Subject: delivery milestone overdue, urgent. The sender: Wexler Group, one of Daxon's oldest clients. Reliable, patient, fiercely detail-oriented, the kind of client who never complains unless they've already triple-checked themselves. Apparently, they hadn't received their Q3 progress report, which was supposed to auto-send on 9:00 a.m. the Friday prior. The client portal showed no updates, no logs, no alerts, just silence. Logan forwarded the message to IT and CC'd half the leadership team. His note read, "Please look into why the milestone alert system failed. Wexler is priority. Let's ensure this doesn't repeat." What struck me most wasn't the urgency, it was the phrasing. Why the system failed. Not who ran it, not what changed. Just blame the machine. I read it from my living room that morning while sipping coffee from my favorite chipped mug. Even after being pushed aside, my read-only credentials still let me peek into Daxon's internal dashboards, oversight on their part. Or maybe just arrogance. Either way, I wasn't going to mention it. I logged in, navigated to the heartbeat panel I once updated every Friday at 11:30 a.m. without fail. That was part of the protocol, my digital fingerprint to reset syncs across client workflows, recalibrate flag thresholds, and refresh token sequences. But I'd been gone for exactly 7 days. And sure enough, the dashboard looked off. Where there should have been smooth green status bars under each client module, there were pulsing red zones, 7 of them. Wexler's was just the first. The others? On countdowns. Silent, precise. Like ticking fuses in a machine no one realized was rigged for time delay. Not destruction. It wasn't sabotage. It was decay by design. Without that credential renewal, the flag system hadn't failed. It had simply expired. Like a living body forgetting to breathe when the mind steps away. I leaned back, watching the numbers shift. Each red zone had a unique timeline. The way I built it, the system would begin delaying responses, misaligning task queues, and skipping alerts. Just by seconds at first, then minutes, then days. A slow unraveling, too quiet to trigger alarms, too erratic to trace. Logan wouldn't understand it. It would blame unexpected data behavior. But I knew. I had known from the start. And so I smiled. Not with vengeance. With validation. They thought removing me would save them $2,700 a month. Instead, they were about to learn what that salary had been quietly buying for 19 years: stability, clarity, consistency. As I closed the laptop, the sunlight hit the window just right, casting a soft glow across the room. One down, 6 more to go. By Thursday of that same week, the red zones on my dashboard weren't just glowing, they were pulsing. Everlane was next, their automated reporting sequence delayed by 46 minutes. Then, a time-stamped invoice scheduled for 9 a.m. showed up in their inbox at 2:17 p.m. with corrupted column headers. Not broken, just garbled. Enough to look careless. Then came Novatech. They flagged missing follow-up notes on a high-stakes compliance issue. Brixton's task queue didn't sync with the contract review window. Foresight's shipping analytics were misaligned by 48 hours, which meant they rerouted a bulk delivery based on the wrong forecast. Cardian's portal crashed once, then again, then timed out for 4 straight hours. From the outside, it looked like a rough tech week. Internally, Logan scrambled. At 3:50 p.m. on Friday, he sent a company-wide message assuring teams that IIT is monitoring the anomalies and asking everyone to remain client-focused and solution-oriented. Translation: smile harder while the floor shakes beneath you. Meanwhile, I stayed silent, watching, letting the unraveling speak for me. What no one realized was how long I had held that house of cards in place, not by brute force, but by rhythm. I had been the heartbeat, not just the builder, the person who saw patterns no one else knew to look for, who remembered that Wexler preferred their data in PDFs, not Excel, that Novatech hated duplicate touchpoints, that Foresight's COO once dropped a vendor over a 12-hour delay, and now, without me. Those things, small as they seemed, were stacking like faults beneath a fragile crust. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was decisive. And then came the message that stopped me mid-sip. A forwarded client satisfaction survey, sent anonymously, but clearly from one of the 7. One question asked, "What could improve your experience with Daxon?" The response? "We miss Sarah. She was the system." 8 words, that's all it said. But I sat with that line longer than I ever expected, because they hadn't said I was good at my job, or reliable, or knowledgeable. They said I was the system, not just a part of it, not just a cog. The whole thing, for years. I had kept my head down, believing my value was in the background, in the invisible. Now, in my absence, it was finally seen. I closed the dashboard one last time, let the screen fade to black. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like recognition. The kind you don't ask for. The kind you earn by simply never letting the system break, until you leave it to speak for you. The first sign of panic came in the form of a typo. At 7:22 a.m. on Monday, Logan sent out a hastily written company-wide memo titled Systems Stability Plan. Not stability. Stabili. He never corrected it. The email was a jumbled mess of vague reassurances and buzzwords. Something about restructuring internal frameworks, strengthening client engagement pipelines, and recalibrating our operational posture. But beneath the fog of corporate speak, one thing was clear. He was losing control. My phone buzzed twice that morning, both calls from HR. I didn't answer. They didn't leave voicemails. By 9:40 a.m., I'd already seen the leaked screenshot. It was a clipped internal Slack message, shared anonymously in a private tech forum. One of Daxon's mid-level devs had posted a line from an emergency strategy meeting. The line was highlighted in bold red and attributed to Logan himself. "We have no idea how the system is built. Not, we're having issues. Not, it's being investigated. Just raw confession. We don't know." I stared at the screen, one eyebrow raised, slowly sipping my coffee. Not out of spite, out of distance. The detachment wasn't fake, it was earned, for the first time in years. I didn't feel tied to Daxon's pulse. I didn't feel like I owed them clarity, cleanup, or comfort. I was no longer their lifeline. I was the gap they created, and now had no idea how to bridge. Around 11:12 a.m., I received a message. Not from HR. Not from Logan. It was from Becca, a colleague I hadn't spoken to since the week I left. We weren't close, just two people who'd shared more deadlines than conversations. Her message was short. I wish we had protected you better. No punctuation, just that line, quiet, heavy. I sat with it longer than I expected. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a request. It was something softer. Regret, maybe, or clarity that came too late. Either way, it didn't change anything, but it reminded me I hadn't been invisible, just silently watched, silently underestimated, and now silently vindicated. By 1:30 p.m., another department lost access to their project tracking tools. Client teams were reverting to spreadsheets, Slack channels filled with confused threads and conflicting directions. But I didn't refresh the dashboard. I didn't check the logs. I didn't even open my laptop again. Instead, I walked down to the corner cafe, sat by the window, let the midday sun cut through my coffee like honey through tea. The chaos wasn't mine anymore. And the silence? It finally felt like peace, not exile. Let them chase the ghost of the system. I wasn't hiding. I was just done. The first email came in at 8:57 a.m. on Wednesday. Subject: quick follow-up, private consultation. It was from Novatech's COO, Erica Maddox, a sharp, composed woman I'd worked with for over a decade. We'd exchanged hundreds of project updates and quarterly reports over the years. But never like this. The body of the message was short, almost cautious. Hi, Sarah. We heard you've stepped away from Daxon. If you're available for a quick consult this week, we'd really appreciate your insight. We've run into some inconsistencies, nothing urgent, but we value your perspective. No attachments, no fluff, just a professional lifeline wrapped in understatement. 10 minutes later, I replied. 20 minutes after that. I had a calendar invite for 3:00 p.m. the same day. We met over video. Erica wasn't alone. Two senior project managers joined, along with Novatech's CEO, Robert Kim. I hadn't expected that. They didn't waste time on pleasantries. Robert leaned forward and said, "Logan told us you'd retired." His tone was flat, not angry, not surprised, just knowingly amused. Erica cut in gently. "But you replied to my email faster than Daxon responded to 3 open support tickets last week. So we figured maybe Logan wasn't telling the full story." I smiled. I didn't retire. I was restructured. There was a pause. Tight. Intentional. Then Robert nodded slowly. "That explains the breakdowns." They walked me through what had happened. Late responses, misaligned data fields, auto-generated emails, missing key compliance phrasing. Exactly the type of subtle failures that came from systems misfiring beneath the surface. I didn't gloat. I listened. I asked the right questions. And when I offered a quiet summary of the problem, without notes, they all nodded like people hearing the truth they'd already suspected, but needed confirmed. Then came the question. Robert leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head, and asked, "Can we rebuild what you had? Without Daxon?" The room went still. Even the virtual silence had weight. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at the screen, at the faces of people who had always spoken to me through project briefs and scheduled reviews, now speaking to me directly, clearly, as a peer, and for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel like a hidden architect. I felt like the blueprint itself. "Yes," I said, calmly. But it has to be built right this time, clean, clear, and owned. Robert smiled. We're ready when you are. That evening, as I closed my laptop, the light in my apartment caught the photo of my daughter on the windowsill, the one from her college graduation. She once told me, Mom, you don't just fix problems, you build things no one sees until they break. She was right. Only now, they saw it. The first voicemail came in at 10:21 a.m. on a Tuesday. Logan's voice was quieter than I remembered, strained, almost polite. Hey, Sarah, hope you're well. We were hoping to touch base about some of the recent issues, just whenever you have a moment. Give me a call? I didn't. The second came that evening, followed by a short email. Subject line. Touching base again. No attachments, no apology, just vague concern masked in corporate civility. I archived it. By the end of that week, I had received 5 missed calls, 3 emails from HR, and 1 message from Daxon's outside legal counsel labeled time-sensitive. I didn't open that one. I didn't need to. Because by then, I had already moved on. 2 weeks after the call with Nova Tech, I filed paperwork for an LLC, Maddox Systems Consulting. I registered it from my kitchen counter at 9:30 a.m. while my tea steeped. I didn't need office space. I didn't want employees. I just needed 1 laptop, 1 chair, and the years of infrastructure that lived in my head. By the end of the month, I'd signed 3 of my former clients, Novatech, Foresight Foods, and Cardian Capital. Not out of loyalty, out of trust. They weren't chasing a company name. They were following the person who'd kept them running without fanfare for over a decade. I worked my own hours, walked to the park at 2:00 p.m., took calls barefoot, laughed again, slept in on Thursdays. Nothing extravagant, just mine. For the first time in 20 years. I wasn't managing damage control. I wasn't babysitting executives. I wasn't compensating for anyone's gaps in competence. I was building something where I controlled the rules. And Daxon? They kept spiraling. A year to the day after I left, I met Erica from Novatech for coffee. Midway through our catch-up, she said casually, Did you hear? Daxon's suing someone, apparently. They think whoever rewrote the system sabotaged it. They're calling it malicious design. I blinked. Rewrote? I hadn't touched a line of code in over a year. All I'd done was let my credentials expire. No sabotage, no hidden virus, just absence. I asked, Who are they suing? She shrugged. A guy in IT. I don't know the details, but they lost 4 more contracts this quarter. Apparently, they're bleeding, slowly. I stirred my drink and let that sink in. It wasn't joy I felt, it was clarity. They were chasing ghosts in systems they never bothered to understand, panicking over gaps that had always existed. They just hadn't noticed them when I was quietly patching the cracks. That night, I stood by the window in my living room, watching the city lights blink through the fog. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't triumphant. I was free, not just from the company, from the need to explain myself, from the habit of making others look competent. They had built a castle of glass, and I had simply walked away with the 1 brick that held the foundation steady. And when it all started to fall, I didn't yell, I didn't warn, I just watched, and built something better. It was a quiet morning, no calls, no emails, just the hum of the kettle at 8:00 a.m. and the soft clink of a teaspoon against porcelain. I sat in my home office, the same one I'd pieced together with secondhand shelves and good lighting. The contracts were steady. The work was clean. The stress was gone. I no longer flinched at the sound of my phone. I no longer braced for fire drills I didn't ignite. I no longer shrunk to fit the silence that came after someone else took credit for my work. Instead, I simply existed, fully, in a space I'd built for myself. That morning, I opened my inbox and saw a message from my daughter. Subject line: they still don't get it. Do they? I smiled before I even clicked. Mom, they replaced you with someone new, didn't they? Another strategic lead with a polished resume and no soul. But guess what? They're still falling apart. You were never just part of the system. You were the system. And now they finally see it. You're irreplaceable. I hope they finally admit it, even if only to themselves. I reread the message twice, blinking more than usual. Not from sadness, just the weight of it. She saw me, not just as her mom, but as the woman behind decades of invisible work. Behind systems no one praised until they broke. And for the first time, I allowed myself to honor that truth. That afternoon, I pulled out an old hard drive from a drawer. The label on it was worn, barely legible. Operations 2007. Final V3. I smiled. Inside was the very first client database I built for Daxon. The foundational code. Rough, imperfect, but functional. Alive. It was what carried the company through its first 5 years of growth. I printed the first module, lines of code wrapped in logic I had written between school pickups and late-night tea. I framed the sheet in a simple black frame and hung it above my desk. Centered at the bottom of the page, I added a line, system authenticated by S. Maddox. Do not attempt replication without permission. Not out of ego, out of truth. The world doesn't always recognize what's holding it together until it starts to come undone. That was me. For 19 years, quietly syncing schedules, redirecting failures, making sure no client ever saw the chaos we smoothed over behind the scenes. And when they thought they could replace me with someone younger, flashier, more forward-thinking, they didn't just lose a person, they lost the pulse. But I didn't fight. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't storm out. I walked away, with dignity, with clarity, with the code still in my hands, because I wasn't erased. I was never just part of the system. I was the code. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or replaced, know this: you are not forgotten. You are not finished. You are foundational. Share your story in the comments. Like this video if you've ever built something in silence. Share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because your experience matters. Always has. Always will.